know what you have done. We are going back empty-handed, without our daughter. But listen to this very, very carefully. You are cursed. You shall not live for a long time. Just like you shortened the life of our own child, so will the life of your children and their children after them be shortened. Our daughter would have given us strong and handsome and beautiful children, but they have died in her womb. In the same way, your daughters and their daughters after them shall not know marriage, neither will they have children. Those who will ever get married, or indeed succeed to childbirth, shall suffer the worst in the process. Their wombs are under a curse. What comes forth shall reproduce the curse. The women went on and on with the men in their company, accentuating their proclamations with emphatic agreement. Soon after making these proclamations, the small party departed, leaving behind an astonished crowd. The remaining group then disbanded, one person at a time, without saying a word. Only a few could produce sounds of disbelief, a short murmur, or just a sigh, or by simply clapping once. The elderly walked away with heads downcast and arms locked behind. None of them could fathom what the scuffle was about. However, there were a few that had put the pieces together, but for now they chose to remain silent. For Walia's family, it was a big blow. Fear had gripped them, from the oldest to the youngest. For a brief period, they could not rise from where they were seated, each one engrossed in thoughts. Then they all returned to their chores, slowly and quietly. When Kayemba, Wale's favorite wife, finally decided to confront her husband about what had transpired, she was stopped in her tracks. One of the children screamed from the direction of Walia's hut. Walia had suddenly become ill. By now the sun was already setting and the rest of Sensela village was retiring indoors. It is a strange sickness, the local herbalist said when he arrived. There was an aura of uncertainty on the gloomy company that had gathered around him. They all looked on as the local healer administered several potions to Walia, who now lay helpless on the reed mat in his hut. They all wondered what had led to the event earlier that day, but none had the courage to ask. They could not even call upon the assistance of their neighbors. Everyone waited quietly. In the early hours of the next day, Walia died with his secret closely tied to his arm. He did not go back to the medicine man. In fact, no one ever went back to offer sacrifices after that, and from that time the altar lay desolate. With time, the medicine man who knew about the pact also died, and the place where sacrifices were made was covered with thick foliage. The new curse, however, started its course in the first line of Walia's children. Of all his 25 daughters, only 15 found suitors, but there was nothing to write home about their marriages. Very few successfully had children, and only daughters were born from one generation to another. Over time, the family did not really expand, and there was no one to carry the family name, apart from a few who continuously used the name Walia. Luambe closed the book, and for the first time paid particular attention to the middle name of the author, Elizabeth Moloshichikwama. The author's background showed that she had been educated by the missionaries in the early 20th century. Her parents, before that, had been committed members of the early missionary church that had first established a mission in Sensela village. As Luombe went back to read the epilogue, she was captivated by the words, "Unless it is broken, the curse will continue to wield its power over the descendants of Walia. I have tried in vain to break the power of the curse that was pronounced 5 centuries back. I hope that someone, somewhere in the future will succeed." Luombe looked at her watch. It was just about knocking off time. She decided to visit her mother. Her mother's house was a mere 20 minutes drive from her office, but with congestion at that hour, it took her a good 40 minutes. "Hi, Mom," Luambe said as she alighted from her car. Chileshe was in the garden. "Luambe, baby," Chileshe said as she put the garden fork she was working with down and pulled off her gloves. She had never stopped calling her only daughter baby. The birth of Luambe had nearly taken her life. Chileshe was educated, had had a very good job that had paid her well. She was now retired, comfortably enough to sustain a little business that kept her going. "At least I can pay the bills," she always told herself. Single-handed, she had managed to give her daughter a moderate education, but good enough to give Luambe a great start in life. Although Luambe was married to Shadrach, Chileshe did not really approve. "Any woman can do just fine by herself," she had said when Luambe had introduced her fiancé. Luambe didn't really know who her father was. There had been many men in her mother's life. Each one was introduced to her as her uncle. So from Uncle Alan to Uncle Zachary, there was no telling who had actually fathered her. "I want to do this, Mom," Luambe had insisted. "I hope that you will not regret this decision, my baby," Chileshe had emphasized. Her mother had put up a front at the plush wedding that had been hosted in a 5-star hotel, with guests from high-class society. The ceremony had earned gossip from all walks of life. That was 15 years ago. Had Luambe regretted having gotten married to the son of a tycoon despite her mother's warning? The man had everything every woman dreamed about. Chileshe called for some drinks, which were brought in immediately. "You look tired," she said, staring at her daughter. "Just some pressure at work," her daughter lied. "Or is it insomnia?" Chileshe gave her daughter a quizzical look. When her daughter didn't answer, Chileshe suggested, "Luo, what do you want to prove? Anyway, I have spoken. The rest is up to you." "Oh, Mom," Luambe said. She didn't want to get into an argument with her mother. Luambe had resigned to stick it out, thereon in a marriage that had proved to be a nightmare from the first day she got married. For Shadrach had not even spent his wedding night with his wife. He had gone to be with Felicia, who was also among the invited guests. Luambe knew that if she left Shadrach, she would still make it on her own. But how was she to sustain the sybaritic lifestyle that Shadrach gave her on a silver plate? She was now addicted to it. The fancy cars that changed practically every month. The spacious mansion that sat on a 10-acre plot was well tended by 5 maids, 3 ground workers, and 24 hours security. The furniture had been well picked from as far as Italy. Luambe was given a huge allowance that she could spend throughout the month. She had traveled the world and could possibly go on holiday to any part of the universe. The house was filled with the latest high-tech equipment. "No, I can't leave all that," she thought, and changed the subject. "I have been reading this book entitled Desolate Altars by Elizabeth Moloshichikwama," her mother finished for her. "You know her? You've read the book?" Luambe asked, excited. "She was my great-grandmother. Well, she was the cousin of my great-grandmother," answered Chileshe. "I read the story. It was so captivating." Chileshe asked. "Mom, is the story true?" Luambe asked, leaning forward. Chileshe stared at her daughter. "Fiction will never be gospel truth, Luo." "What if it is true, Mom?" Luambe asked. Chileshe did not want to get into an argument with her daughter, so she too changed the topic. When the two women had talked for about an hour, the younger one looked at her watch and bid farewell. Chileshe did not go back to her gardening. She sat briefly, thinking about what her daughter had started. She remembered her own mother's warning against trading carefully the matters concerning the covenant that their forefathers had started. But Chileshe had dismissed it as mere speculations by an old lady. However, as Luambe drove home, she made up her mind to do something about her predicament. She was now very convinced that her marriage was under some sort of spell that she needed to deal with. "I will make a trip to Sensela village and try to find this altar," she thought. When she arrived back at her house, Shadrach was out as usual. Felicia's cooking was more palatable. He had blatantly told his wife over and over again. After a shower, she went down to see what her chef had prepared for dinner. She sat at the huge 10-seater dining table and practically pushed food down her throat. It was delicious, but she did not recognize any taste. Her mind was fixed on the journey she intended to undertake to the north of the country. Surely someone could have a clue as to the location of Sensela village. It must have existed. After lingering on in front of the huge flat-screen television for the most of the evening, Luombe decided to retire to bed. Soon as she fell asleep, Dreamland transported her to a place that she had never visited before. Yet it felt and looked familiar. The sun was just setting, and she was standing on the bank of a river. She looked around, and across she saw a group of young girls. They were naked, apart from the loose raffia skirts that covered their waists down. They wore beads around the neck and across the chest. Just when she was about to beckon for their attention, someone tapped her on the shoulder. She turned, only to face one of the girls that she had seen across the river. How had she crossed? The girl was very pretty. Her breathing rhythmically caused her soft breasts, which were covered scantily with beads, to rise and fall. Her dark, smooth skin glowed in the light of the setting sun. She had some kind of tribal markings on her cheeks. After staring at Luombe for a while, she said, "You are Luombe, daughter of Chilisha." Luombe nodded her head and asked, "May I know who you are?" "If I were you, I'll just listen," the girl continued. "You are not supposed to be here. Leave right away." It was an order. "Who are you? And what right do you are not welcome here?" the girl interjected. "We know what you're looking for." Then the girl broke out into laughter. It was evil, loud and deep like a man's. Just then she transformed into a grown man, her eyes bloodshot with deformed teeth. "You see, your forefathers should have thought about the consequences of their actions, the pain and the suffering that their greed would bring to their descendants, to you." The man roared again, his voice reverberating across the river to the girls who also joined in the laughter. Luombe, now on her knees, shook her head violently. But I'm innocent. No one was listening. "Do you think I was happy to lose my life at a young age?" The man was back in the form of the girl again, bearing a very innocent countenance. Luombe was shivering to the core. She could not sum up the strength to run. She remained fixed to her spot as if she was held in place with a huge peg. Just when she thought it was over, Luombe heard the sound of many babies crying. She looked in the direction of the noise and saw, on the river, many infants floating on the water. The girl laughed a little longer and said, "Those are the children that you should have had. You, your mother, her mother, and all the women before you." Luombe was stunned into silence. When she turned to face the girl again, she was gone. So Luombe started to scream. Just then, she felt someone waking her up. It was Shadrach. She had not heard him come in. She looked at the clock. It was 3 in the morning. She sat up and looked at him, still confused by her dream. Shadrach stood in front of his wife, gazing at her expressionless. From the look of things, he was just arriving, or had he been standing there for a while? He threw some papers at her and said, "I don't expect you to contest that." He hesitated and then added, "I want you out of my life. You are like an obnoxious weed. Felicia and the kids will be moving in soon. Don't do anything to delay the process." With that, he walked out of the room, without giving Luombe an opportunity to respond. Luombe stared at the door her husband had just closed, and then looked down at the papers that were now on her lap. She was confused by everything that had happened. The dream, and now a divorce. Shadrach could not have picked a better time. She sat in bed for a very long time, thinking. She thought about how life would be after leaving Shadrach. She wanted her marriage badly, more than anything in the world. Was she going to stand seeing Felicia with him? Was she going to allow another woman enjoy all the luxuries that were rightfully hers? Just before dawn, Luombe rose from her bed and walked to the study, opened the safe, and picked an item that Shadrach always kept locked away. She walked to the spare bedroom, where her husband was sleeping. After letting herself in quietly, she looked at him for a moment. He looked peaceful in his sleep, very handsome. Then she pulled the trigger, killing him before she turns the gun on herself. The Desolate Altar still cries out today. Cries out for a sacrifice that it has been denied for over 500 years. The end.